You're not being told the truth about what's happening to the NHS.
The Health and Social Care Act has legally abolished the NHS.
And this is the Abolishing Act.
The NHS has already been destroyed.
The wholesale dismantlement of our NHS, the NHS we own.
When politicians and private healthcare industry lobbyists claim that we cannot afford the NHS, this is the exact inversion of the truth.
When I started this film, I had no idea of the hidden truth behind the NHS crisis headlines. What I was to find out was deeply disturbing.
They've gobbled up the Royal Mail, the railways, the water, the electric, the gas, and now they're coming for our National Health Service.
I was one of the thousands from all ages and backgrounds who was at the arrival in London of the People's March for the National Health Service. The marchers had replicated the famous Jarrow to London Hunger March of 1936. The 300-mile march had been organised by a group of working women from Darlington, the so-called Darlow Mums.
It's time for change! Change in how we treat the most vulnerable and neglected people in our country. The NHS is the last bastion of this force for good.
The event made me wonder if I was witnessing the stirrings of something bigger. A popular revolt against the rampant free market ideology that had dominated our lives for almost 40 years. To find out more, I went to meet their inspirational founder and leader, Joanna Adams. What lay behind her undertaking this remarkable act of public resistance?
When my sister had lung cancer, she had a stroke because of a blood clot. And her treatment for a stroke was delayed because they closed the stroke unit. I was looking for what could I do. I had to do something.
Sarah died without ever recovering.
I set up a Twitter account. I just made up a name off the top of my head, 999, call for the NHS, something urgent, it's an emergency. And the march, everything has happened because of that.
What we're about is about making ordinary people feel part of something, about making ordinary people have a voice.
Despite coming from a staunch Labour Party background, Joanna had been determined that the 999 campaign should not be a Labour Party vehicle, but should appeal to everyone.
We are not party political. We don't back any party because that would exclude people.
At our first meeting, the strains of Joanna's commitment to the campaign to save the NHS were immediately apparent.
Go and get Matthew and see if we can get you to come down.
Oh, you might be better.
8 o'clock, 8:30, they're in bed and asleep, and then it's time to do your work. So, as in campaign work.
I don't think you realise how much time you do.
I do.
Oh, okay.
I do realise. I don't know how to stop. I don't know how I can not do it. I will stop. When we've saved the NHS, it'll be fine.
Right.
I love you, Steve. You're brilliant.
I can't remember how I met Joanna and the Darlow Mums. Somewhere on Facebook or Twitter or something, and then we said let's have a chat, and then that was it really. Because there are so many campaign groups out there right now, but what we've tried to do is offer them a very simple network map. They can go to the map and they can simply click, let's go for North East because that's where we began, and inside there you've got Save the Friarage, you've got Defend Our NHS. I mean, hopefully they can all connect with each other. That's always been my dream.
I have 2 little boys. What would they say to me if, oh Mum, what was it like when we had the NHS? As far as I'm concerned, it's sheer terror.
The next day, I accompanied Joanna and the 999ers on their first venture since the People's March, a strategy meeting of national campaign groups in Stafford.
We are a completely grassroots, homespun, make it up as you go along.
Fly by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, grassroots campaigning group.
I soon learned how this band of political innocents had already been subjected to the darker side of big party politics.
We don't have any real experience other than what we're learning and doing now. And we make mistakes and we get things wrong.
Their big mistake had been to trust fellow campaigners who had turned out to be party activists working for New Labour. With the general election looming, the Labour activists had had other motives for helping them.
And then they all show up, and like this, behind your banner, and suddenly your campaign is a Labour Party campaign.
Now, stand up if you already actually have walked 300 miles for the NHS.
Unlike campaigners like the 999ers, New Labour did not support full NHS renationalisation. They were still tied to the free-marketeers. This was despite the huge cost to the public of the 2008 banking crash and the free-marketeers' subsequent drive to slash public spending and force councils and hospitals to fund themselves by making profitable assets and services available for privatisation.
One of the things that the march did, and the reason that we held the march in the way that we did, was as a means of linking up all of the groups up and down the country. We found that that was a much more effective means of communicating with people than trying to get the BBC to cover anything.
But the dark side of what happened on the march, its appropriation by big party activists posing as grassrooters, known as astroturfing, and the toxic atmosphere of suspicion and intrigue it had created amongst campaigners, quickly surfaced.
You need to be aware that on NHS campaigning, there are two agendas and they are mutually incompatible. Some of us want to save the NHS, and some of us want to get the Labour Party re-elected to continue with the privatisation. But Group 2 misrepresents itself continuously as Group 1. You're right, astroturfing.
I found myself caught up in this when Joanna and I received a poisoned pen letter from the same New Labour activists. They were trying to stop me from exposing the story of their appropriation of the 999 People's March in this film. In their letter, they claimed they had information which they would reveal to Joanna's employers and which could get Joanna sacked from her job.
The fact that someone who knows me and my family and our situation thinks it's okay to threaten me and suggest that they're going to cost me my livelihood and my children are involved in that, yeah, that's upsetting.
Though Joanna wouldn't admit it to me when I filmed her, Steve told me later that it had taken him till 1 o'clock in the morning to persuade Joanna not to quit campaigning. This was another disturbing example of how determined New Labour's top-down old order were to maintain their grip on the party and control dissent from the party's free market-friendly line. The free marketeers' intentions had been secretly spelt out many years before New Labour came to power. In 1977, senior Tory MP Nicholas Ridley had drawn up confidential plans for dismantling nationalised enterprises. The Ridley report had foreseen how unpopular this would be. Great stealth would be needed, particularly with the NHS.
We've done it by giving people choice in public services. Which school is right for their children? Which training course is best for the school leaver? Which doctor they choose to look after their health, and which hospital they want for their treatment.
The first major legislative step for the NHS's dismantlement had been the 1990 NHS and Community Care Act. This had introduced the internal market and competition into the NHS.
Today, we are charged with the deep responsibility of government.
The privateers' penetration of the NHS had been significantly expanded by our now free market-embracing New Labour Party. The 1997 National Health Service Act had enabled hospital works and services to be undertaken in hugely costly partnerships with privateers called private finance initiatives, or PFIs.
Welcome to Chelsea and Westminster Hospital NHS Foundation Trust.
Many hospitals had become independent bodies, able to raise their own private sector financing, and patients had now become customers.
Oh, God, one of you been privatised since 1979. Don't you dare lie to me!
In a decisive move in the NHS's dismemberment, Tory Health Minister Andrew Lansley's 2012 Health and Social Care Act had removed the minister's responsibility for providing healthcare for England's people. This had been left to NHS England in a tortuous bureaucracy modelled on market lines. The appointment in 2013 of Simon Stevens, a former CEO of America's largest private health insurance corporation, United Health, seemed to campaigners another key step in the marketisation of the NHS.
Let's get practical and talk about the how and not just the why and the what of the 5-year forward view.
They saw Stevens's 5-year forward view's plans as intended to transform the NHS into an American-style private public healthcare system run to suit international big business interests.
Campaigners have saved Lewisham Hospital from cuts.
Also in 2013, another remarkable campaign led by NHS practitioners had scored a landmark legal victory against the government's plans to close key services, including its A&E, at London's Lewisham Hospital.
Our NHS became the model maker for the rest of the world for more than 60
Professor Alison Pollock, a prominent campaigner, had been a key figure for over 20 years in exposing the stealthy privatisation of the NHS.
Virgin, which is bidding for £1 billion, 1% of the NHS budget, never provided care, ever, and is taking some of the most vulnerable services for people with mental health and learning difficulties. Many of them American, South African, Canadian companies from all around the world.
To save the NHS from the private sector predators required radical new legislation. The first National Campaigners Conference, organised by the 999ers, was where this legislation to fully renationalise the NHS was unveiled.
About 7 years ago, my GP surgery was taken over by an English subsidiary of the US multinational company United Health. And that surgery in Camden Town no longer exists. It motivated me to become more involved in the campaigning. We have come up with the NHS Reinstatement Bill, the second version of which we finished last weekend.
The NHS Reinstatement Bill was to become the rallying point for campaigners and the public around the country.
It would reinstate the government's duty to provide the key NHS services such as hospitals and medical and nursing services and ambulances. It would abolish the NHS Foundation Trusts, which are basically... Andrew is here.
But at this stage, only a handful of Labour and other parties' MPs were willing to back the bill. One of them was the then little-known Jeremy Corbyn.
And I think it's wanting hope in the Labour Party and actually not getting a lot back at the moment. And that's why people are getting so uptight and cynical. And they want to hear the things that we thought the Labour Party would stand for.
Whatever their doubts about the Labour Party, it provided campaigners with their only ray of hope. Only the party's full backing for the bill could save the NHS. Labour's fortunes in the coming general election would be crucial. That evening, the 999ers collected a trade unions award for their Jarrow March. It proved a remarkable eye-opener.
It's my choice to join the Green Party, and I'll tell you why. They want to invest money in the NHS. They want to build social housing, a bit like the 1945 Labour government. And Caroline Lucas, she's the only one of them who moved a private members' bill to renationalise the railways.
I've left the Labour Party, can I just say this? I joined the Greens as well. And the reason I did that is because who was presenting a bill today in Parliament doesn't stand a chance of being passed. Caroline Lucas, that's who. The biggest opposition that we've had has been from the Labour Party. I've had threatening letters, I've had people threatening to lose me my job.
What was startling was to see the leader of a prominent union and the leader of a grassroots campaign group turning their backs on the party that had been their bedrock.
So it's thanks to these guys, actually, that we're back talking about whose NHS.
Our NHS.
This desertion from New Labour did not bode well for the party at the coming general election.
I've just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, and I will now form a majority Conservative government.
Joanna contracted glandular fever, almost certainly caused by all the stress of her campaigning work. She had to take a long rest.
I managed till 3 o'clock without bursting into tears. I couldn't quite, I was with friends.
And just watch the Tory votes come in. As tray after tray was taken to take the votes away because there were so many Tory ones. It was just dreadful.
Then as soon as that exit poll came out,
I spent the next day in tears, I think, like many people.
Oh, it's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I'm looking around and I don't know who people are. I have no clue what country I'm living in.
In the 1930s, as Germany became a fascist country, ordinary people would have been going to work, taking their children to school, they would have been doing their housework, seeing their friends, popping out for coffee or whatever, doing the normal. It would have looked exactly the same. If the Labour Party had stood up and told the truth being that we no longer have an NHS which is fit for purpose, it is in chaos, it has been broken to pieces, it is riven through with privatisation. Forget the 6% mantra, this is an NHS which is riven from top to bottom in its very structures, not just about whether particular companies have got particular contracts for particular services, but actually structurally the structure is a privatised structure. That is what's causing the chaos. That's why you can't get a GP's appointment. That's why you can't. Why there's chaos in A&E. That's to do with the closures. It's to do with the sell-offs. All of these things are reducing the NHS available. The NHS bill makes that very clear that those are the issues, and it spells out what you have to do to put it right. And the Labour Party could have adopted it. They could have thrown their weight behind it, and they could have used it as a flag to tell people the truth of what's going on. And they chose not to. In fact, not only they chose not to, they chose to oppose it. And that in itself is their failure.
I want to thank Peter Roderick and Alison Pollock in particular for all their amazing work. And all of the campaigns, I can't name them all, but so many local campaigns have been doing so much amazing work.
Could we get ready, please, to give a big cheer and a send-off to Caroline Lucas, Green MP, about to leave for the Commons.
This is our NHS.
This incredibly positive and wide range of popular support for the bill reflects a strong belief in a publicly provided NHS. People are rightly worried because the NHS, consistently ranked one of the best in the world, is under threat as never before. No, I will not. For a gentleman who has spent about 2 hours boring on this morning, I will not give way. The inescapable truth is that the private sector is camping out on the lawn of the NHS. It is using all the corporate machinery available to it to pick off the low-hanging fruit, the non-urgent, easy and profitable services.
Just thank you so much, everybody, for the amazing effort that thousands of people have done over the last few weeks to put the pressure on the MPs to turn up today and support the bill.
Do the best to get whoever she can.
Well, we should also try and get somebody to take it as a private member's bill.
Keep it back in. I think we just go straight back in with it.
251,000.
It was a landslide.
Jeremy Corbyn, on a wave of grassroots disaffection with New Labour's free market-friendly old order, became the party's new leader. Could this provide a lifeline in the campaigners' desperate struggle to save the NHS from the privateers?
He does speak to grassroots level just by his very You know, the man goes out and goes to meetings with public. How you turn that into a big grassroots organisation, that's the big task.
I'm slowly starting to sort of come out of the fog of, you know, stress and worry, and, you know, I have time to spend with the kids a little bit more, and I did some running and things that I never would have had time to do. You know, focus on those things again, work and put things right in my own family, and like, you have got a cold, yeah, you're quite sniffly. Why don't you go get a tissue?
Okay. Yeah.
That's a good idea, isn't it?
Where are they?
Bathroom?
No, they're not.
Well, you have to maybe just get some toilet paper, because I don't know.
There's Steve. Yeah.
There's Steve. There he is. And he's laughing already. Hello! Look at you, skinny Minnie. How much weight have you got?
Oh, quite a bit.
I don't know where it is.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, I'm back in Darlington, where it all began, aren't I? Yes, it all began in Darlington, so I felt it was very important to go back to the roots. The big problem at the moment is the task is so immense in terms of turning around the awful things that are happening in this country, that all the campaign groups are really suffering a period of what will work, what do we do. The really good thing about the bill, despite all the issues you know about, all the arguments about whether it does this, that and the other, the good thing about it this time round is that it is the only thing that's actually got campaign groups to work together.
What matters is, in the end, there are people within the Labour Party now campaigning for the reinstatement bill.
The government is preparing what it calls its nuclear option.
In a move that would escalate the battle, the government announced the imposition of a new working hours contract on the NHS's junior doctors. The battle was now clearly political. The junior doctors committed themselves to the first all-out national doctors' strike in the NHS's history.
We doctors as a whole are realising that we are a crucial line of defence in a battle taking place on multiple fronts. That nursing
Given the public's deep, long-standing respect for NHS doctors and nurses, having NHS staff join the battle was a hugely important step forwards for the campaigners.
It's very interesting when one watches what sort of language is used and how these very fear-inducing terms are sort of repeated but in differently spun ways. It's brainwashing on a mass scale. This is mass propaganda.
The use of social media to counteract the established media's misinformation and to arouse protest was central to the work of campaign groups like 999.
When you've got Americanised companies running medical centres that have got GPs in, well, it happened to my local GP. Somebody else is managing it now. And the doctor himself has to have a manager.
And that's what the American companies are doing. They're moving into those top level of managerial positions.
What can we do about it?
What can we do about it? Where people are really just going to have to get on the streets and cause trouble.
I was impressed by Steve's and the 999ers' efforts to reach out across the political divides. This seemed characteristic of the grassroots new politics, based on particular issues rather than on party loyalties.
I'm also part of a campaign group called 999 Call for the NHS against the same thing. And there is a wonderful professor called Professor Alison Pollock, who, along with a lawyer called Peter Roderick, they wrote a bill called the NHS Reinstatement Bill, and they want to return this to Bevan's principles, not to turn the clock back to an old-fashioned health service, but to keep the principles that it is comprehensive, universal, properly funded as a public service, is comprehensive, universal, accessible, all of which, if you did it in the old-style public service way, actually costs you relatively little money. But since 1990, in bit by bit by bit, in little tiny slices, they've been privatising, splitting it up, putting things out to commissions.
I've worked in social services for 20 years, so everything's been put out to tender, everything's being cut.
Desperately need to come together. Okay, so you take care. Well done.
All my life I've been a Tory supporter. Every single year since I've been able to vote, I voted for the Tories, but no more. Never, ever again. They're just... in my opinion, what they're doing, they're disposing of the infrastructure of this country. They're giving it all to private companies, which means, to me, means we won't actually need a government because they won't be governing anything. That's my opinion. And the fact that we are going to lose Charing Cross Hospital with more than 300 beds, it's going to be dropped down to 24 beds and they have the cheek to call it a hospital. It's a clinic, nothing more.
All of this, it's your life. It's not just a building. You know, the hospital's not just a hospital. It's where people have their babies. It's where my dad died. It's where, you know, it's part of what makes your life story. It's all of our, you know, everything that I've got that really matters that I can pass on to the kids is their history, their family, their memories, their heritage, and it's just gone, like all going, and it's not right.
In December 2015, Stevens and NHS England had published their Sustainability and Transformation Plans, or STPs. These demanded that local NHS and council authorities provide detailed plans for carrying out the 5-year Forward View's aims. These would involve further reduction in hospitals' public beds, the cutting of England's 144 A&Es to 40 to 70, and the removal of locally based family GPs.
We have collectively been using July for intense discussions face-to-face with most local NHS and local government leaders across the country on how their services and transformation plans are shaping up. These, as you recall, are their local implementation plans for the 5-year Forward View, what the 5-year Forward View will mean in Lincolnshire or Leicestershire or Lancashire.
To campaigners, NHS England's plans, with their demands for further cutting of services and hospital beds, were central to a strategy of deliberately creating shortages so that the public would turn to the private sector to provide them, thus furthering the development of a 2-tier public-private system, one for the better off and one for the less well-off.
Here is Japan, here at the top. You have 13.32 beds per thousand population. Number of hospital beds is a very important indicator. This is England.
It's about 2.7.
2.7. Compared with your nearly 14, we have less than 3. So if you understand, when people were talking about queues and waiting lists to get into hospital, when you go into hospital, you need a bed. If you're having an operation, you need a bed. And now we can see why, because we have far too few beds, and we have been losing them since May 2010 at the rate of 50 a week.
Below Columbia. That's where we'll end up if they give us the small hospital they're promising. If they don't give us that, and the government has already said they won't allow it, if they don't give us that, we'll have 0 beds per 1,000 population. The 650,000 people will have no beds.
And my proposal is that...
The campaigners were pleased by an invitation to a meeting with Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell and Shadow Health Secretary Heidi Alexander. They hoped to be able to raise the question of the sustainability and transformation plans there.
If Labour defend the NHS and get it back public, they win the election. It's in their interest. We're the people. I keep saying this. We are the people. They are not. They're our servants. We should bloody well tell them what we want and they can do it. Simple as that. And I'm afraid we must realise, and if it comes to the crunch, I know I'm getting a bit sort of up and tight about it, but if it comes to the crunch, we ought to say to them, if the Labour Party don't want to bloody well save the NHS, we'll bloody well stand aside and we'll save the NHS. We'll have strikes out on the street, we'll do all sorts of bloody things, because it's in our hearts, it's in our beat.
I'm going to listen today, observe Heidi Alexander, there's no hope with her. The NHS is being destroyed with this 5-year forward view, this thing called the 5-year forward view, and every time I use it I think we're just normalising it. It's called a nice thing. It's the most outrageous, most god-awful carving up of the NHS, and under the guise of stitching it back together and integrated care, it's taken the Labour Party's words from last year and just slammed them in our faces. They are sewing it back together after having ripped it apart, put the private companies in. Now they're putting it back together under the guise of let's make it more like it used to be, with the companies involved still inside. And they'll then be the NHS. They are the NHS. So, yeah, it's not good.
Very quickly, any hopes or expectations out of this?
No.
No hope at all?
No.
That I am concerned about the prospect of another large reorganisation.
We are being reorganised now to death. So we need to stop that. We need a stabilising change, which is what this NHS bill maps out.
We actually need to be working together to change the bloody government that we've got, to be honest. Now, you will say to me, one second. No. You
A lot of responses in this room, a lot of experience in this room, a lot of NHS staff in this room. It's really important for the Labour Party at the highest level to hear that and to understand that. And how are you going to get rid of the market?
That's what we're fighting for, John. It's not actually about some kind of political game. It's about people's lives. They write the most terrible things because they can't get the care that they need anymore. It's what keeps me going.
Campaigners' spirits were raised by the National Union of Teachers coming out and supporting the junior doctors' strike. Here was another sign of growing public resistance to the privateers.
The trade unions, they've got an open top boss. There looks as though that there really is a massive combined union presence supporting the doctors. I want to cry. That's amazing. That's really, really fantastic.
NHS! Not for sale! 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 NHS! Not for sale!
See, I'm wavering. I'm tottering on the edge of going back into the Labour Party.
You mustn't. Heidi
Why?
Alexander's a nightmare.
Who?
Heidi Alexander, Shadow Health Secretary for Health.
Oh, yeah.
McDonnell and Corbyn are under siege, basically.
I know they are, but they need help, don't they?
They need help from the outside.
We know that in Cornwall, they are starting to put barriers in terms of people who get a hip replacement. If you're overweight, for example, they will say, well, we no longer provide hip replacement surgery for people who are overweight. Now, that is a new development. This is the beginnings of rationing, and that's rationing based on cost, because budgets are being squeezed.
The NHS will not be a state provider of health services. It will be a state insurer of health services. In other words, that's the way it works in America. The private sector provides. There are some public sector and voluntary sector provision, but basically all that the state does is it pays. Effectively, it insures those people who can't insure themselves.
I had been concerned at how the 999ers would fare without Joanna's strong leadership. It was good to see Steve and the other 999ers taking over the reins of the group so readily in her absence.
I think people have become aware of us as members of 999. I think someone, I forget who said it, they said, well, you are a bit spiky, but at least you're truthful and honest. And I think that I'm quite proud of that, actually. Yeah, we are a bit spiky and we say the wrong things now and again, but we're just doing our best and we're really passionate about saving the NHS. And you come across other groups where you can't always trust people. For me, that's the big thing. I'm sick to death of hearing about solidarity when I can't trust people.
Steve's concern was that the campaigners were still caught up in the conflict racking the Labour Party.
This has been a disastrous weekend for the Labour Party. There have been mass resignations by 11 shadow ministers, with many more expected this morning.
His fears seemed justified when 999 suddenly hit the news.
The headline for this article is Labour Health Advisors.
Former Shadow Health Secretary Heidi Alexander, one of the new Labour shadow ministers who had recently resigned, had attacked Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell for taking NHS policy advice from grassroots campaigners like 999er Joe Land, who were not long-standing members of the Labour Party.
Then, of course, another is Joe Land, which they put here as a Green Party activist.
My local Labour Party know that I was in the Green Party and let me in.
This was seen by campaigners as part of the ongoing war being waged by New Labour's old order against the Corbyn leadership.
It's ironic, this week I was actually considering rejoining the party. It seems counterintuitive to a party that are trying to win an election that they're not prepared to listen and try to attract the votes of people who aren't necessarily Labour Party members.
It's fine. I have got this one, Steve. Don't worry. Do not worry about this. I have got this one. It's fine.
I was struck by the 999ers' non-hierarchical and informal ways of working together. This seemed another refreshing example of the grassroots new politics in action, with women very much to the fore.
We ourselves are painted as mad, lefty, militant, whatever you like. We are smeared, even by other doctors.
Given how notorious the American health system had become for its exploitation of people's health needs, I had found it difficult to believe that the NHS was in danger of being Americanised. But a young doctor's disturbing revelations helped make me think again.
I'm the one that on the wards, I have to tell the NHS patients they have to wait a few more days for their scan, a few more days for their chemotherapy, people with cancer, and yet the private patients go directly up. They're getting their treatment immediately. So I am seeing in real time right now today the emergence of that two-tier system, and what the emergence of that means is that you start blocking care, you start blocking access to the NHS patients, you start blocking it to people that can't afford it, and that's what that means.
Speaking out like this was risky for junior doctors, as they didn't have the whistleblower's legal protection enjoyed by other contracted workers, as Dr. Chris Day had discovered after warning of understaffing.
By a junior doctor, I mean any doctor below consultant grade could say something, anything, regarding relevant information about a hospital in this land and could have their career taken away.
Our biggest barrier is getting over the fact that there isn't enough money, immigrants are to blame, the system's broken because, you know, there's too many people pouring in and all that kind of thing. But if we want to engage people en masse, in the millions, we've got to get over this thing of we can't afford it, it's not sustainable. I know I'm staying in the office and you all know that, but I think for me as a member of the public, that's vitally important. That's it, really.
Every single member of the political elite who said anything about the NHS in the last 30, 40 years has been a liar. Because they are privatising the NHS and they started that privatisation programme 30 years ago. Democracy isn't working, and in those situations you have to take direct action. To put several thousand people onto the streets of the city and launch a civil disobedience campaign to expose, block and reverse the privatisation of the NHS before it's too late.
The trouble is, it's really scary. We've been saying it for 2 or 3 years now. What we need is mass civil disobedience. But actually putting it into reality is a whole different ballgame.
The terms of an agreement has been presented to the government and NHS employers and to the BMA.
The junior doctors came to a settlement with the government that left many of them unhappy. They continued to fight alongside the campaigners.
We were told the NHS
NHS was safe in the hands of the Tories and how much they love the NHS. Well, here's what they didn't tell you. The Health and Social Care Act has legally abolished the NHS. Here's what they didn't tell you. There's a massive programme of hospital closures being sold as care in the community.
So I'm a junior doctor on the front line in the NHS for the last 8 years. But you're not being told the truth about what's happening to the NHS.
The junior doctors had learnt that their fight with NHS England and the government was part of the wider battle to save the NHS from the privateers. The 999ers knew that rural areas would be particularly hard hit by the Sustainability and Transformation Plan's cuts and closures.
We've got the lowest wage area, lowest car ownership.
Yeah.
So people do need stuff on the ground. And plus the A&E are suffering so badly. The minor injuries unit in Bideford is under threat. The Ilfracombe one's under threat. So where do you go? The panic here for people come Friday night, 5, 6 o'clock, you're thinking, hope to God nothing goes wrong the weekend, because you just haven't got that cover.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
It started to change under Margaret Thatcher's government. And Margaret Thatcher, she said you had to make changes so small, so incremental, that people wouldn't really notice them happening. A paper was written, this laid out the basic principles in 1988 by two MPs who are currently still MPs, John Redwood and Oliver Letwin. And what they wrote was a paper called Britain's Biggest Enterprise. And in it they spelled out how you would have to go about changing the NHS until what you got at the end of it was a situation where the private sector ran alongside the public sector with no providing our services, with no distinguishable difference between them.
I'm heartened that there's so many people here, because it's a pretty fruitless job trying to wake up our public about our health service. What we're talking about is a battle. It's a fight, elemental fight, of good against evil. The health service is founded on the principle of love thy neighbour, and that's being turned right round so that everyone will be concerned about whether they can afford the insurance, this, that and the other, just like the car, or you shop around. What was a wonderful service has been reduced by multiple attacks. What we're talking about is destabilise, God, they're good at that, demoralise, and the morale has sunk in all the professions. The health service is going through your fingers like sand, and Health Watch et al., there's lots of them, patient participation groups, virtual meetings on computers and that sort of thing. That is all there to aid the process of the sand going through the fingers.
You need to make sure that, that the government, whatever government comes in, is prepared to actually look after the NHS properly. So there's a lot of lobbying to be done there by campaign groups. And MPs are generally not terribly well informed about the way that the country works. They're not terribly well informed about the way that certain institutions work. And what they rely on very heavily are their researchers, their secretaries, and also the people who lobby them. The information that they're fed on a daily basis comes from a very particular direction. It comes from the corporate sector, basically. And campaigners, by contrast, have quite little access directly to the MPs.
We are going to have a quiet, silent demonstration procession around the outside of this hospital holding a red ribbon.
The NHS is facing a humanitarian crisis this winter, according to the Red Cross.
The continuing refusal by the government to give the NHS money it needed led to a major NHS crisis over the coming winter. To campaigners, this was an escalation in the government's strategy of deliberately creating crises to further undermine the NHS and escalate pressure on the public to turn to the private sector for their healthcare needs.
Starting with this year, I have to tell you that I see no likelihood that the NHS will receive additional infusions of cash.
Despite the cash and time pressures being forced on them by the government and NHS England, some councils, working closely with local campaigners, were refusing to collaborate with the sustainability and transformation plans.
We didn't actually see them until the day before we were meant to sign them off.
The campaigners received a further boost when the Labour Party leadership publicly backed the NHS reinstatement bill.
This bill is a very important bill, and I just want to assure you of my personal support for the principles behind the bill, that we have to fight privatisation, that we have to fight marketisation, that the NHS is about service, not profit.
Healthcare shouldn't really be a sort of the focus of a fight for democracy, but it is at this moment. To me, fighting for a universal health service is actually fighting for democratic rights. That not only have we won it in the past, but now they're trying to take it away by deception. But thank you for you doing it.
It's been an absolute honour to be on here. Right, I've got to move.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But although almost 60 Labour MPs now backed the bill, there was still a very long way to go to getting the Labour Party as a whole to back NHS renationalisation. This small event, with its many familiar faces, was a reminder that if the NHS was saved from the privateers, then it would be largely down to an astonishingly few campaigners up and down the country willing to commit a huge amount of their personal lives to their cause.
Not this exit, it's the next one.
With the sustainability and transformation plans soon to be enacted, Joanna returned to the fray despite her illness.
I'm looking forward to it and dreading it all at the same time. On the one hand, it's like, oh God, here we go again. And then on the other hand, it's like, and another thing!
So it's a good time for Hartlepool to be aware of things, and for me, I think the simple thing is trying to re-inspire people to get to join the group and get help playing out in the game. They're all exhausted.
We want to stop these sustainability transformation plans completely. We want to stop them because they mean the end of the NHS.
This man, Simon Stevens, is the man you need to start really talking about and remembering.
Hello everyone, nice to see you all here.
It is not just your hospital they're coming for, it's for all of us. It is the basic principles that those war heroes fought for. Social justice, equality and cohesion. Thank you very much.
My nephew had gone to my mother-in-law's house and found her on the floor. She'd fallen backwards, banged her head and hurt her hip. It was over 3 hours, 3¼ hours before the ambulance came. My wife rang and said, why is it taking so long? They said, well, she's not bleeding and she's not unconscious. And Christine said, well, she's 87.
Half the ambulance stations are gone. There's less ambulances to do that in the first place. It's a terrible thing.
But we need people with your passion, and we've just got to keep at it, and that's all
We
we
need
can do.
everyone to have a bit of passion for it.
But a wholly unexpected system shock was to place the NHS in even greater danger.
The immediate economic and political consequences tonight are grave and the future deeply uncertain. But a majority of the country has voted for Britain to go it alone.
We've got our country back.
Corbyn's large number of Labour MP opponents now saw an opportunity to oust him from the party's leadership.
Owen Smith, the leader's former work and pensions policy chief, joined Angela Eagle in saying that they believe the current leader, much criticised amid the Brexit referendum fallout, is unelectable.
It would be a very dangerous experiment for a major Western country to get gripped by this type of populist policymaking, left or right.
Wouldn't it be an idea to step aside and allow someone else to lead Labour?
Obsessed with this question, if I may say so. Utterly obsessed with it.
Isn't it an important obsession to have a strong opposition in Britain? And
we have a very strong opposition in Britain.
That.
If you bothered to report what we were doing.
I don't think we're going to have a chance for the bill unless there's Jeremy Corbyn as leader.
Yeah, there's no chance of saving the NHS without Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn elected as leader of the Labour Party. The veteran left-winger has comfortably reinforced his position as head of Britain's main opposition party. Corbyn was backed by nearly 62% of 500,000 party members.
The EU referendum and the Labour leadership challenge showed yet again how divorced politicians and the media were from deepened grassroots disillusionment with the centres of power since the 2008 banking crash. Another unexpected system shock added to the perils now facing the NHS.
Today, the United States renews our deep bond with Britain, military, financial, cultural, and political.
America is the driving force in global healthcare. Healthcare is one of the largest components in the global economy. The NHS is the 5th largest enterprise in the world.
The companies that now in the UK, like Hospital Corporation of America, are being done for fraud and embezzlement and treating patients for heart surgery that they didn't actually need. It's the American companies and the American health insurers that have been putting pressure to remodel the NHS along US lines.
The first national NHS demonstration was organised by Health Campaigns Together, an umbrella organisation for national campaigners recently started by the oldest campaign group, Keep Our National Health Public. It proved to be one of the largest public protests since the Iraq War in 2003, and another sign of the growing cohesion and impact of the NHS campaign.
I certainly do think there'll be a need for more direct action at some point in time, yes. You're not listening to us when you're out there shouting in the streets what we're meant to do. You know, people got fuck all. When you've got fuck all, you're going to go out there and you're going to do some damage.
I used to be a Conservative voter until my autistic son gave me a political enlightenment from which I will never recover.
In what sense?
I mean, understanding the truth about society, understanding the power of legislation, understanding that there's no such thing as the deserving and the undeserving poor, and that we are all equal. We're like smokers who become the most virulent anti-smokers. You need people like that who have been so completely misled by their education, their families, their upbringing, their culture, that they believe a pack of lies.
Because they were so poor, because there was no birth control, the big families, she made sure the family was looked after. She didn't look after herself, and she couldn't make any milk to feed the baby, and the baby died because they couldn't go to the chemist and buy formula. They couldn't get a wet nurse. They couldn't go to a hospital to get it, and the baby died in her arms of starvation because she couldn't feed it herself. And that's before the NHS, and we can't have that, and it will happen again if we don't stop this.
We're going to block any trade agreement that gives a green light for US healthcare companies to come here and strip out and take from our National Health Service.
We've used non-violent direct action wherever necessary. We've used joining mass protests wherever possible. We've occupied the grounds of Westminster Abbey. We've blockaded Westminster Bridge.
NHS campaigning can be very stressful, and Joanna has had to quit because of ill health.
It's like sitting on your hands, watching things that you care profoundly about and are completely crucial, but not having the ability to sort of do them anymore. It's frustrating mostly. It's sad. Makes me angry.
We've just chaired a meeting of the Cabinet where we agreed that the government should call a general election.
Prime Minister Theresa May's decision to call a general election was at a time when Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's standing in the polls was at an all-time low, and an overwhelming Tory victory was universally expected.
You're an ex-Tory voter yourself, aren't you? Yes. Another one.
It was planning that opened my eyes.
I'm trying to protect my family. I'm trying to protect the NHS. I'm trying to protect all the assets that they're selling off.
Yes, absolutely.
And we need lots more protectors.
People must stop being brainwashed that protest doesn't work, because it does, and it is the only thing between the government and the corporate interests behind them.
Robin Hood used to rob the rich and give the money to the poor. I think the Conservatives are the absolute opposite. They're like the Sheriff of Nottingham, rob the poor and give to the wealthy.
The money is gushing upwards. It's gushing upwards. Yes.
What we need is a revolution, a peaceful one, a passive one, but a revolution. We know that this government is selling off the NHS to private companies. If you don't believe any of this, read the Naylor report, which is going to be investing £10 billion to privatise the NHS, to sell off all the assets to private companies. So my question is, will you stop the privatisation of the NHS and revert it back to the people who pay for it?
It just feels like they're going to win. How can they win?
The trouble is that people haven't got the choice. You know, if they don't like Corbyn, they'll have to vote Tory. That's the ultimate choice. And that's the system is just. There are plenty, you know, a good Green choice or a decent Lib Dem. You know, but people don't have confidence in it. It's only a two-party system and it's defunct. Doesn't work.
It's 10 o'clock, the polls are closed. They're going to start doing the exit polls. Hang on.
Yes, oh my God, can this be true, please?
6 seats.
Overall majority is possible but not certain. Conservatives, exit poll, 314, down 17. Labour, plus 34.
This is a real shift. It's good. So far.
Darlington was meant to be the seat that told us that Theresa May was heading for a landslide, and instead Labour have held it.
Yeah.
Shifting the mindset, that's the important thing. If people are thinking
I don't want to see
they're wrong.
people.
That's great. This is grassroots, groundwork campaigners, not just NHS, everything. People are on the streets now in ways they weren't 5-6 years ago, so that's good. And if we can force some sort of hung parliament through, then we have to keep pushing.
In Scotland, a massive swing from SNP.
Steve and Deborah voted for the Green Party, the only party to support full NHS renationalisation. But Joanna returned to the Labour Party.
Everything changed. Corbyn became leader and he said all the things that we wanted to hear. I want to see renationalisation. I want to see a change in our culture, the way our society focuses only on the economy and not on any other aspect of what I think makes a successful country.
The Corbyn leadership and general election results suggested that a sea change in the popular mood that I'd wondered about when I started the film was indeed emerging. In August 2017, Stevens and NHS England introduced a draft contract for the commissioning of accountable care organisations, or ACOs. These America-derived organisations allowed for private companies and private insurers to take over the provision of profitable NHS services and the management of billions of pounds of NHS funds that could be used in the interests of the privateers.
We work with hospitals and providers to take unnecessary costs out of the system.
This would see the end of the NHS as a fully publicly owned and publicly run national health service. With barely 6 months to go before the introduction of ACOs in April 2018, and with little public awareness of the terminal threat now facing the NHS, the situation looked ominous.
Now, the Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt and the renowned physicist Stephen Hawking have clashed over the way the government is reforming the NHS.
Well, Jeremy Hunt won't be very pleased when he hears Professor Hawking's speech, because he concludes by saying he's going to carry on speaking out and warning of the dangers of increasing privatisation as he sees it, and a move towards a more American-style healthcare system.
Goliath wouldn't be here today if it were not for the NHS. We must prevent the establishment of a two-tier system, with the best medicine for the wealthy, and an inferior service for the rest. International comparisons indicate that the most efficient way to provide good health care is for services to be publicly funded and publicly run.
A 2017 report on national healthcare systems by the influential Commonwealth Fund ranked the USA bottom of 11 leading countries, with the most expensive, least safe and least accessible healthcare system. Despite this, the government was continuing, like its predecessors of the last 30 years, to use American models in their conversion of the NHS into a public-private enterprise. For campaigners, the rise in NHS waiting lists was an example of the damaging effects of these policies to Britain's healthcare needs. The convincing of important public figures like Professor Stephen Hawking and Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn of the threat of US-style NHS privatisation were significant moments in the campaign. But could the Labour Party be convinced at its coming national conference to finally repudiate all privatisation of the NHS and commit to its full renationalisation?
Good to see you. Fantastic, you're filming it, yeah. I reckon about 2,000. 2,000, very good. Yeah. Gus has been filming you since the beginning. Brilliant, lovely, nice one. I'll see you later.
Yes, let's renationalise, and that's not a word that you're really hearing now from the Labour Party, and that is frustrating, because if we can take water back into public ownership, if rail can be taken back into public ownership, why not the NHS?
So we said quite clearly,
never!
We will end all the plans the Tories have to privatisation, and those that they've privatised will bring it back.
Oh, that's good. I like that. It's going to bring it back into public ownership. I like that. The Labour Party needs to make a break with the past.
So we are going to fight for the NHS. We're going to reinstate the NHS. We're going to reverse that Health and Social Care Act.
So what we're seeing now is not just cuts and closures, but the wholesale dismantlement of our NHS, the NHS we own. And in its place, the government is bringing in American healthcare corporation models called accountable care organisations and accountable care systems.
Shame.
Disgusting. They have brought in a draft contract, which, if it goes through, will allow all our services to be bundled up and outsourced to large healthcare corporations. The government are doing it already with our NHS land, our buildings and estates. They've privatised NHS estates, creating 2 private property companies that are now charging market rents to our hospitals, to our GP surgeries, to our clinical commissioning groups. And that is why they can no longer afford to operate.
The NHS has already been destroyed. We don't have a National Health Service. We've got 44 STPs, which are like local, corporatised, Americanised packages of care delivered within fixed budgets. It is affordable. The transaction and management costs of the commercial market and now the new planned privatisation strategy are so enormous that abolishing that market, as has been said, will make a massive contribution to a renationalised health service, which, as we've heard, must be universal, must be comprehensive, must be fully publicly provided.
When you consider that, the whole NHS budget for a year is maybe about 110 billion, and then you consider the savings made going forward from a renationalised NHS that doesn't have funds draining away into the pockets of private companies. If it was 40 billion, it would be 40 billion well spent that would completely repay its investment in the time to come. And we've just got to be bold in this country and say, you've had your money, we want our NHS back.
A vital step in getting the Labour Party to back renationalisation was getting support for the NHS reinstatement bill from local party delegates from around the country.
NHS reinstatement bill, Professor Alison Pollock's detailed critique.
Having learnt how seismic the changes are that the NHS is facing, and with so much to do to prevent this, I had become an active participant in the campaign.
Oh, really? That's good news. The NHS bill has been included in the motion, and also the abolition of the 5-year forward view. I think that's fantastic news. NHS reinstatement bill, Professor Alison Pollock's. NHS reinstatement bill, Professor Alison Pollock's key points about the gaps in Labour policy, really important. The bill apparently has just been voted on for the composite, so you can vote for it.
No problem, thank you.
Thank you. Are you voting delegate? Voting delegate. Oh, hi, Keith. Hi. Very good. Just got on the composite, apparently.
I heard that, yes.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it'll probably go through.
Well, it will go through.
It will. Well, that'll be.
They'll let certain things drop, though, won't they?
Oh, will they?
Yeah.
What sort of thing? What
like the internal market, they'll let it drift on one side.
Oh, really?
This is a major step forward. I must
okay. John, all right. Okay.
There was a considerable amount of resistance, apparently, to the NHS bill being in, not from the delegates, but from other parties. Everything that we wanted to be in there is in there. So we just really, really need to get delegates to vote for it now, unamended. It doesn't need any amendments. We don't want the bill taken out. We don't want the opposition to the 5-year forward view taken out. We need those in. It says Labour is opposed to accountable care systems. We need to keep that in. You know, it's great. Don't touch your hair on its head. It's perfect.
Many campaigners were deeply disturbed by the huge influence on a country's economic and social policies that the global financial sector, led by international banks and financial institutions, had come to exercise over 40 years of free market dominance. But economist Bill Mitchell explained that the British government had no need to be subservient to them.
Two biggest hedge funds in the world have had their money stuck in Iceland for years now, can't get it out. Sovereign state, legislative power, capital has to do what it's told when the citizens use the sovereign state to advance their well-being.
A sovereign state like Britain, with control over its own currency, creates and manages its own money. The 2008 banking crash had shown that it could, and did, create huge amounts of money when it wanted, without having tax revenues in hand to do so. The government had been able to use the publicly owned Bank of England to create tens of billions of pounds to bail out the bankrupt private banks at a stroke of a Bank of England keyboard. This flew in the face of the free-marketeers' long-standing dogma that the government could only spend what it had in tax revenues.
There is no such thing as public money. There is only taxpayers' money.
If the government could create all this money to cover the financial sector's enormous needs, and without any adverse effects on inflation or the value of the pound, as the years since the crash had proved, why could it not do so for our society's needs? It was hardly surprising that campaigners felt that the free marketeers' dogma was a fallacy, and that all that was really required to fully renationalise the NHS was the political will to do so.
We have to be resolute about it and clear about it.
After all, then Health Minister Nye Bevan had driven this through in 1948, when the country had more than twice as much national debt than now, and a devastated country and economy. But could the Labour Party rediscover the will for a fully nationalised NHS? Could it shake off the privateers' shackles? The motion to be voted on next day by party delegates from around the country would be a significant test.
This is perhaps the most important motion on the NHS that a Labour conference has considered since 1948.
Very important motion this afternoon on the NHS, some information here.
Right.
The bill is about reinstating what you and I might consider to be the NHS.
Yes, yeah.
And it means taking out the whole provider market. This afternoon for the NHS motion.
Yes, absolutely.
The NHS bill is included in it.
Yep.
Well, that's this afternoon, and a lot of the bill is inside that
together is actually trying to make that happen.
Very, very well. All right, cheers.
Can I ask you to vote for the NHS motion?
Oh, I will be 17 years a patient in the NHS. We need to sort it out. Definitely be supporting that.
Thank you very much.
Labour have done anything, they've done the NHS, and they've done the world proud by setting the model.
Now it's time
Working
to get
class
back.
people are fighting back and we're on the march. Yeah. Thank you, bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
We're in a period where governments are doing something extremely radical. They're sort of trying to bring an extreme Thatcherite project to its logical conclusion. They're trying to get rid of the welfare state here and in the rest of Europe. And turn everything for corporate profit. So they're doing what they're doing in the third world, you know, what the IMF has been doing. It's very radical.
The Health and Social Care Act, 350 pages long, because it was written by McKinsey's corporate lawyers in order that they could privatise the NHS. The precise origins of the new models of care and the accountable care systems that are now being imposed on us are at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2012, when a group led by Simon Stevens, now Director of NHS England, but then Vice President of United Health, developed clear proposals for undermining public health services around the world and replacing them using these new models of care.
When the Health and Social Care Act 2012 went through, having campaigned really hard against it, I just was depressed for a fortnight and then thought, right, better try and get into politics to try and do something there. So that was why that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I got into just a little bit later into campaigning, but for the same reason, around the Health and Social Care Act. I mobilised a lot of people, and I joined the Labour Party around 2012.
I'm just so thrilled that, you know, it's so important at conference this year, and people are getting behind it, because so many people have campaigned for such a very, very long time. Nerve-wracking. Someone's filming us here. It's nerve-wracking.
Sorry, interrupting. NHS motion just passed overwhelmingly.
Yay!
Yes.
Fantastic. That is a really brilliant result. I couldn't be happier. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That is brilliant.
So it did pass, I heard. What was the result?
Unanimous.
Oh, it was unanimous. Wow. So that's a really good step, I guess, for the Labour Party. It was a hugely bold opposite motion. And that's the job now of campaigners outside pushing, not letting up. Those inside the party have to then also do their thing. So, but that's a coordinated. That's the way hopefully good democracy can work. You know, we'll all help each other to get there in the end.
So you are saying you feel that there is the seeds of some kind of democratic regeneration, possibly a tiny little bit?
I would hope so. I do think there is. Not nearly enough. Not nearly enough yet.
Steve's concern was echoed in an urgent legal action by prominent campaigners against the government and NHS England over their imminent contracting of accountable care organisations, or ACOs.
The Secretary of State for Health, Jeremy Hunt, wants to allow these new commercial organisations to take full control of most of health and social care and the budgets with it. But there is nothing to stop them being owned by large insurance companies, finance and property companies,
who could eventually take them over and run them purely for profit.
Jeremy Hunt is not giving Parliament the chance to decide whether this is a good idea before allowing 10 to 15-year contracts worth billions of pounds to be awarded and signed.
Thank you very much.
They're not looking at the big picture because they don't want us to know or understand what's happening.
Though the campaigners lost their case, their action did delay and disrupt the ACO plans. Attention had now been drawn to how ACOs would Americanise the NHS, and NHS England rapidly rebranded them as Integrated Care Systems, or ICSs. But an NHS insider's report confirmed that, as in America, integrated care systems would incentivise healthcare providers to profit from reducing public access to care. This could see large financial rewards flow out of the NHS into private companies' pockets. President Trump's first visit to Britain jolted public awareness of the threat to the NHS from American big business interests.
Everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that, but everything will be on the table.
Would you, as the American president, see that as a deal breaker if none of the NHS was on the table?
I don't see it being on the table. Somebody asked me a question today, and I say everything's up for negotiation, because everything is, but I don't see that being, that's something that I would not consider part of trade.
Whatever the free-marketeers' pronouncements, what the public were not being told was how the Americanization of the NHS was already being embedded with NHS England's implementation of integrated care systems. Nor were they being made aware of the involvement of big American companies like US business consultants McKinsey, United Health's UK subsidiary Optum, US healthcare giant Centene, and other US interests in the planning, running and provision of a now commercialised NHS. A visit to an old friend was a reminder of why the loss of our NHS to commercial interests will be a blow to so many.
I'm 85 years old. I was in my teens at the end of the war, and I was very conscious of what was happening with the servicemen returning from the fight, determined this time they weren't going to be thrown on the ash heap.
If you came from the working class, as my father did, the problems then of falling ill were a nightmare, frankly, for most families.
For the majority of the population, healthcare was a matter of charity. Fundraising parades were a regular sight on Britain's streets. Without a radical change, good healthcare would only ever be for the privileged few.
This extraordinary government, most radical government we had for 1945, started the National Health Service. The other day on the BBC, Dr. Edith Summerskill was quoted. She was one of the early health ministers. She went as a young doctor into a poor bedroom where a child had all the rickets, living in filth, and she tried to help this child. And she said, and that is when I became a socialist. And that made me cry, because that is what I am, a socialist. I'm talking about caring about people, caring about folk, caring about people who can't look after themselves. I've been taken care of by the NHS all of my life. A few months ago I was diagnosed with cancer, and I am for the NHS. I will go down fighting, or I'll probably die in the arms of the NHS. But don't let it go. Don't let it go.
Over 40 years ago, the Tory party's secret Ridley report spelt out plans for privatising nationalised enterprises like the NHS by stealth. It is now clear how far these plans have progressed. They continue to be enacted without proper public knowledge or democratic consent.
So why didn't they tell us?
Because they didn't believe they could win an election if they told you what they were going to do, because people are so wedded to the National Health Service. It's the nearest we've got to a national religion. It's a kind of national sacred cow.
So the Tory position was the health service is safe in our hands, and we're just not going to tell you we're going to
change it,
blow it up and start again.
Change it completely.
In the continuing national conflict over Britain leaving the EU, the election of another maverick free-marketeer and Brexiter Boris Johnson as Tory party leader added to the jeopardy facing the NHS.
This House has left no other option than letting the public decide who they want as Prime Minister, and I commend
Would it be fourth time lucky for Boris Johnson as he tried again to secure MPs' backing for a general election?
The ayes to the right, 438. The noes to the left, 20.
Let's get Brexit done, my friends, and get on with our project.
Labour's manifesto is a manifesto for hope.
It's the best manifesto I've ever seen. It's the environment, it's Brexit, it's schools, it's hospitals, it's everything. It's university for the boys, it's people having homes, it's people having food, it's everything.
The NHS and its Americanisation became a key issue in the election.
We've now got evidence that under Boris Johnson, the NHS is on the table and will be up for sale.
We want the NHS. We don't want it to be privatised. We certainly don't want it to be Americanised. And if Johnson gets back in, with Trump the other side of the Atlantic, we won't stand a chance.
We are here because we want a better society. We want equality, justice, transparency in government, and a whole host of other things, including saving the NHS.
The party leaders were among the first to vote. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has spun the ballot as the Brexit election, saying a vote for his Conservative Party is the only way to get Brexit done. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says the election is the last chance to save the National Health Service.
I can't cope. Honestly, John, just the thought of it, I just said to Paul, I feel sick. Absolutely sick.
Our exit poll is suggesting that there will be a Conservative majority, and that will be the biggest Conservative majority since Margaret Thatcher's third victory back in 1987.
Even allowing for a bit of wiggle room, it looks like Labour have lost.
I'm disappointed. If I'm really honest, I'm not totally surprised. I mean, I'm surprised at the amount, if the exit polls are right. I can't believe they're going to win that many seats. But, yeah, God, what a disaster. Absolute disaster.
That pissed offness is not going to go away. No, that sense that the powers that be are insidious and doing things not in the public interest isn't going to go away.
No, it's not. And it's going to become more obvious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Here's a long text from Deborah. Leave got a majority in what is supposed to be a democracy, and were told in every way but up that it didn't matter, that they didn't matter, and no one on the left gave them a credible raft to cling to. No one.
It's a lot to take in. Just my feeling is that you have to keep fighting, because what else have you got?
I am proud of 999. I'm proud of what we did. There's nothing in it for us other than everything.
In the making of this film, I came to understand why many campaigners felt that their battle wasn't just about saving the NHS and all that it represents. It was also about rescuing our democracy from over 3 decades of ravaging by the free-marketeers. This battle remains crucial for Britain and for its future generations.